What's up, folks? I wanted to talk about what I see as the 5 most important qualities for being a good coach. Obviously, as the Chief Science Officer of 3DMJ, as a researcher, as someone who has spent more than a decade going to school, you're probably going to think that one of my most important qualities that I suggest is knowing the science, being an evidence-based practitioner. And while that did make the top 5, I actually put it in the number 5 spot. There's a lot more important things that must be there before you even start really focusing on the science, in my opinion, and I'm going to tell you why. So number 1, the most important thing for a coach is to have passion. You need to have a true desire to help other people. You need to be motivated by that, and it needs to precede your ego. If you're someone who just loves the science and loves the problem solving and all that, that's great. But if you're also someone who finds that people are a barrier to that, like, oh, they don't understand it, they ask me questions, they don't adhere. If they would just do exactly what I said, they would be great. That's something you got to get over, and maybe you're better suited to write blog posts or do research or something like that and not actually work with people in the real world. Absolutely, those two things can coexist. You just need to really work on things like understanding people and having a desire to help them apply the knowledge you have. So number 2, and this kind of goes hand in hand with what I just talked about, is emotional intelligence. This is about understanding what makes people tick, why they do what they do, and being a really good communicator. You got to have empathy. You also need to have integrity, realizing when it's your responsibility to change your behavior, to act differently, to notice when you made a mistake, miscommunicated something, made someone feel a certain way or contributed to that, and things you can do to move forward, mend those fences, admit your mistakes, and work collaboratively with the person who you are coaching. Number 3 is closely linked to being an evidence-based practitioner, but rather than just the knowledge or the awareness of the science, it's your critical thinking skills. And critical thinking is something that people talk a lot about, but they don't define it well. So I'm going to give you some key aspects to what I think will help you be a better critical thinker. One is being resourceful, knowing how and where to find information, and being able to upskill yourself when you come across something, when you're trying to access knowledge that is confusing to you. You don't know what it means. You know where to go, what things to read, what videos to potentially watch, what is a valid source of information, what might not be, and what is the hierarchy of evidence. All of that kind of meta understanding of science is going to help you so much more than just trying to accumulate knowledge. It's about applying and understanding the knowledge you get, which is incredibly important. Also, 2 other really important qualities of being a good critical thinker are 1, patience, understanding that changing the way you think, reevaluating your pattern recognitions, reevaluating your intuitions, assessing and evaluating, and then changing your biases and your beliefs all takes patience, and it's not going to happen overnight. And it's easy to try to become the king, queen, or emperor or empress of the science domain because you want it fast, and social media is pushing you to be lauded as an expert very quickly. Don't try to listen to that voice. You don't want to be an expert too early, because then you're not actually an expert. You're just Dunning-Krugering all over the internet. So don't do that. And then finally, understanding logic. You want to be able to spot fallacies. You want to be able to spot false comparisons. You want to think more deeply. You want to be able to identify the language of dogma. You want to identify when someone is speaking science-y, but not actually following some of the things you understand about the hierarchy of evidence. They're talking about animal models and mechanistic data and their personal anecdotes, but they're ignoring controlled trials and meta-analyses, and they're speaking in absolutes, and they're using appeals to authority. If they're using appeals to emotion, all of these things should be red flags for you. So you've got to develop a good BS detector, and a lot of that comes from understanding logic, and that's a huge critical component to understanding everything in life. Number 4, and this is something that unfortunately you can't fast track, that's experience. So I do value experience more than I value just having scientific knowledge, because there's a difference between experiential knowledge and book knowledge. I can tell a new competitor what they're going to experience as they go through contest prep, but they won't really be able to alleviate their fears, move forward, and succeed despite the challenges they'll face and persevere without being able to lean on experience. And that's why second contest preps, third contest preps are always better. And that's true not just for competitors, but also for coaches. It's one thing for, let's say, your colleagues to tell you, hey, if you do X, Y, and Z, this will work out really nicely, but you're going to be biting your nails, a little freaked out. You won't have a lot of confidence in something until you've actually implemented it. And a whole lot of knowledge is great, But if you don't know the different ways to apply it that come from working with the plethora of different types of personalities, physiologies, cultures, people, the broad spectrum of humanity that's out there who's going to come to you for help, it's very difficult to know what to do with that knowledge. So experience is incredibly important. It is essentially just organized pattern recognition. But experience needs to be intentional. How many old school coaches who've been in the trenches for years still do really dumb things just because they're set in their ways? So experience goes hand in hand with critical thinking, resourcefulness, staying up to date with the evidence, which I'll talk about in a second, and having a true passion for helping others and not listening to your ego. Because if your experience isn't founded on those aspects, doesn't have critical thinking, if you're not assessing yourself all the time and building your experience like bricks on top of one another so you can reach a higher peak of skill as a coach, then that experience is wasted. And instead, you're just re-entrenching your beliefs. If you just have a cookie cutter system that you use for everybody, and the people who succeed you focus on, and the people who fail, you blame it on them, that's not experience. That's just getting worse over time. So yes, experience is incredibly important, but you have to be experimental in what you do. You have to pay attention. You have to take careful notes, and you have to look to see what correlates with success with all of your clients over time so that your experience can compound and make you better at what you do. And then finally, yes, knowledge is important. Of course, I wouldn't have spent 10 years studying and talking about this and being a science communicator. I wouldn't be the chief science officer. I didn't think it had value. But knowledge is essentially a tool that you can apply in different situations. And yes, if you don't stay up to date, that is a problem. If you don't understand basic physiology, that is a problem. But it's also a problem if that's all you understand and if you don't have all the other qualities. Think about it this way. If you're someone who would have evaluated knowledge as much higher on this list and maybe in the top 3 or the top number 1 thing, is that really true? Does knowledge make you a better coach? Certainly it does, but it is not the criteria for being a good coach. Because if it was, then in 1990, everybody was a bad coach because they were operating off of 30-year-old information. It would mean that every time a new study came out, everyone's coaching level who hadn't read it yet would go down a little bit. But coaching is an art. Coaching is about relationships, and knowledge is about the tools you use based on that relationship. So they're two different things, and it's a very important thing, but there are far more important qualities, and there are qualities that must be synergistic with the knowledge you have. So I hope this helped, and to all you up-and-coming coaches out there, yes, read the PubMeds, but make sure you work on everything else.